Welcome back to the Berg Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. Today we've got myself, Bryan. We've got Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And we've got Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And we're going to talk a little bit about resolutions. We're looking at coming up on New Year's here, and it seems like that's a popular time to sort of analyze what's been going on in your life and what you have aspirations to address or change or revisit in the coming year. And so we got a little bit of a Berg Construction resolutions list and things that we'll talk through.
Yeah, I think Dan in a couple of previous videos has always just said about the fact that like one of the things we're trying to do is not compete, but to just be better the next day than we were the day before. So part of that is trying to identify areas where we can improve in the upcoming year. And I think that we wrote a couple down we're just going to chat about. And the first one is in our planning process. Part of that is always want to improve in the planning process. But as we talked about before, supply chain issues, the availability of getting things, getting manpower, getting equipment, getting pipe or stone or whatever it is going to require us to really strengthen our game in this perspective because of the fact that we can't, in the old days, we might call up and get a piece of material the next day if something didn't go right. But now, unfortunately, with lead times on things, we're going to have to really try and keep our ducks in a row as much as we can. And sometimes it's outside of our control, but what we can control, hopefully this will make our jobs go smoother.
Yeah, so what's that look like? Revising or reviewing the planning process. You know, I had the chance to talk to Scott Gross about it a couple weeks ago, and it came up through a different topic, but sort of the idea that each of us, foremen, project managers, even internally here in the office, have a little bit of sort of a 2 or 3 week lookout, right? So what's that planning process look like? How do we get better at planning?
I think you have to start with the actual handoff process. I think if we're going to focus on something going into the new year as it relates to planning and prioritization and really pre-construction type stuff, it's to get the project from the estimator to the project manager and then to the superintendent in a way that they have a complete picture of what we're trying to do, how we're trying to do it, and what the process is as the estimator saw it. Now, that doesn't mean it's how it's going to be. The estimator's doing the best they can to guess. I mean, that's what estimating is. It's your best guess. It's an educated guess, but it's a guess. By the time it hits a real job, it's much more concrete than it was when you were looking at a set of two-dimensional prints. So I think that we really have an obligation as estimators to deliver to the project managers and the supervisor our vision for how this job was going to go and be transparent about, hey, I bid it and I have this included and this is exactly what it is. And I have this included and you're covered, but we need to figure out what materials we need to actually get this done in the ground. And that's where you have to rely on the superintendent and the project manager and the foreman lead operator roles to look at it and say, okay, here's what we actually need. And then develop a plan so that before we step foot on the job, we have a handle on what we need and what that job looks like. Because that's going to give you the best possible shot at dealing with supply chain issues. Because it would be one thing if I just said, Bryan, from now on, anytime that you want to have Kelly take care of payroll, she's going to have to do it 1 week in advance. Now that's tricky because the guys haven't worked yet. So what are we going to do? But you can figure that out. But if I said, okay, we're just going to pay 40 and then the following week we'll make up for it. People might not like that, but it could be a plan. But if I said, okay, Bryan, so this week, Kelly's going to have to pay 7 days early. But next week, we're going to pay 14 days late. Then we're going to go 38 days early and then 42 days late. And it just constantly changes. And that really is what's been so crippling in this environment is at times you can get things fine. And at times you can't get them at all. And there's no like email coming out telling you that's happening. And you don't know it until it happens. And so that's really one of the struggles that I think planning is the only way we're going to deal with that in 2022 is if we know what we need and we can order it as early as possible and try to get an owner or a client to see, hey, you have to order early and get money for some land and materials. But even if you can't, it's still better to have the materials so that your planning stays in line with where you need to try and avoid being out of schedule, so to speak, from being behind the eight ball. So, I mean, I think that becomes the key. The key for me in that process is what the handoff looks like. Because I feel like once the field gets it, they have a pretty good handle on what their process is. And then their piece is just they need to know what they need to order it, and they need to order it. But if they don't know, we've made it really hard for them.
When I think back to the fact that we have this issue with materials and different things like that, but there's also the fact that, with estimating and getting stuff together, sometimes you're not getting into the weeds of it because there's a certain dollar figure into that piece. And that's where the expertise of the field staff really comes in, because, they're getting a 90% recipe to make this with, and they got to come up with the last 10% because that's what it really is going to be in the field. And then if we have a good schedule and we have things lined up, when we have to go to construction meetings and deal with the clients or deal with adjustments, the stronger our case is for what we had lined up, the better we can keep control of it. Because if we don't have a plan and we go in there, they're just going to tell us how they want it done. But if we have a plan as we go through the process, if there's a delay or if something happens, we have a much stronger case and ability to control our own destiny than if we just kind of go along with what they have. So sometimes on the beginning, our schedule and their schedules all agree and everything looks wonderful in this beautiful chart with colors in it, and everybody's going to be done on this magical date. And then it changes. And, I think part of planning is that there's a long-term plan and then there's a short-term plan, because everything we do when we start a project, the long-term plan is in sync with everything. But then as the job goes on, there's constant adjustments. And I think that's part of a challenge when you have a plan, is to make sure that you can keep adjusting and updating the plan so that as you go through the project, you can try and keep on top of things.
Well, and that point that you bring up, I think you can take that as a point that we will be able to switch to another one of the Ford's resolutions that he has written down that we've sort of looked at and come up with as a team and said, here's things we really want to work on to help the team succeed. But it's important that we can see those changes and that we can recognize that they impact the schedule. But it's even more important that we communicate it. So, it becomes so important that you properly communicate to the client, to the owner, to the team, what has changed and perhaps why it's changed and how that impacts the schedule or the supplies or the manpower. And if you communicate that effectively, you put yourself in a much stronger position to have that discussion in a construction meeting or any other sort of meeting than if you just have it written down as a note that no one knows. And you're like, well, I wrote it down. But if you wrote it down, that's not good enough anymore. You need to communicate so that we can schedule properly. And that is another piece we're going to have to work on in a few different avenues, is communication.
Yeah, and I think that ties into the communicating and results, just as you said. One thing that we really want to do to help our team is, they're out there, they're doing what's in front of them, but, to help them understand how they, one thing we want to cover at some point is how you succeed here. And that's part of it, is to understand the results that you drive and how that benefits your team, the whole team, and benefits the company, and in return then benefits you back again. So part of that is trying to communicate the results of the different challenges. I was thinking back to the job Ben was just on. They're on their 19th revision of those plans as they're doing the job. So he's doing something. Next week, redoing the same thing. And it wasn't that he did it wrong the first time. It's that somebody changed something on him and he had to adjust on the fly. And so I think it's easier to adjust on the fly if you have the plan in the first place. But if you don't have the plan and then you have to adjust from no plan, you really have a double, you're behind the 8 ball 2 times if there's such a physical way of doing that.
Yeah, and communicating results is really going to be important. It's something, before we started the podcast, we had said one of the hopes is that we would get some feedback from guys and from team members and get a feeling for maybe things they'd want to know that they either don't ask us or they ask but doesn't get to us. And that's one of them that I've heard, quite honestly, is I heard it from some people, and I heard it in the quad strat that we did when we got some results, which the team did a great job of filling out and completing those that survey and getting us some really usable feedback that we can try and apply and make this place a better, more efficient place, a better place to work. But one of the things that comes through real clearly is communication of results. How are we doing? How did this job do? And it's a struggle for us, quite honestly, as a team, as a leadership team, because we have to figure out how to show what the result is. Like, it's not so simple as Ford said. Like, if you take Elevate, if you take Wilbur, I mean, they're on their 19th revision. Like, yes, it has not gone as planned, but it's been changed 19 times. You knew it wasn't going to go as planned once that happens, So communicating what success is going to be very valuable, I think, in 2022. It's something I really would like to put some effort and focus on. But we also have to figure out what success is on any given job. And so we understand what we're trying to communicate to the team, whether the success is financial, or the success is performance, or the success is some combination of those two. But we need to figure out what success is in any given job and then communicate that to the team so they understand if we succeeded and if we didn't and why.
Well, I think one thing of success that we'll get into, but one thing I always equated it to is reoccurring business. If you get to come back and they get you the opportunity for the next job with that client, that is a level of success. Now, that doesn't affect the dollars and cents. It doesn't affect that, but that usually means that the client was happy with the work that you did and they're willing to give you another shot on another project. And that's always, a challenge, and that's a litmus test. That is, if you keep seeing you're working for the same client, there is some success that's been happening there, even if it might not, if you continue to not be successful with them, then that's a different transition. But at the same time, if you're able to continue to work for the same client, that means that, the work you're doing on that job site is speaking for itself.
Yeah. And, Ford, I'll try and do it again here where I transition out of one of our thoughts, just to show how there's so much that is linear about what we want to work on in terms of one feeds the other. It's not a progression because one doesn't require the other to be worked on, but they will fix the other one. And another one, when you talk about repeat work, there's continuity there. There is efficiencies that have been picked up in working a couple times for Bancroft. Like, we have gotten more comfortable with Bancroft and understand their processes, and they're a little more familiar with us. We're a little more familiar with them. And that continuity, we apply that continuity to success as a company by getting, multiple jobs. But we can also apply it as the teams, where we've seen that we've made a shift, that we are trying to allow teams to work together to build a feeling of family and a feeling of, oneness as they work together and they understand what each is capable of and how they can help each other out and what they expect. And even more so than that, they understand, each other's families and their situations and things they like and things they don't like, what they do on weekends. All those things factor into making sort of that community feeling that is really, I think, a hallmark of who we are as a company. But by growing into a company that's going to allow teams to develop and work together, we're also trying to have that be a little bit more small cell. So to have it that each team can feel a little bit of continuity and more comfort level with each other and feel really comfortable that way. And I know that's something else Ford wanted to try and touch on.
Yeah, I think that, as you grow larger and more people, sometimes people have to move back and forth just depending on what the job what is needed that day on a job. But if we can really build a nucleus in each team that has maybe 3 guys, 5 guys, it might just be 2 guys, and then they might need extra help on a day or two, so they might get some extra people that can jump in with them. But the reality is, if that group stays together and they can work with each other and they know what each other can do, they can communicate non-verbally because they've spent time together, that just helps them and reduces stress levels within them. So that's one thing we're really going to try and work on this year, is to get some continuity of teams. And it's not going to be every day it's going to get to be exactly the same, because there is going to need to be adjustments as jobs expand. One week they might need 10 guys, and next week they might only need 5, but that 5 would be the main 5 that would kind of ride with that foreman going through the whole season. I think then the next thing we want to talk about is that training, right? What is training? What does that mean? There is, we've put it on the portal. We've done things about like older people teaching other team members things, or people with experience teaching other team members things. But then there's the actual more formal training of like maybe being off job site for a couple hours or a couple days a year to try and get some more education from outside of this, just within what you're doing on a daily basis. And I know one thing we already kind of have lined up for this next year is some more GPS training. GPS is a huge thing, and with what we do, and trying to get everybody to at least a base level of knowledge. And then there's other trainings we'll continue to do throughout the year, but that's one that I think that with having Scott's expertise here at our company, we really want to rely on that resource and try and get everybody up and being able to use it. So you might not use it every day, but when you do get on a job site where that is there, you can try and be as functional and up to date with what's going on with that piece of equipment.
Yeah, and I think this is something, Bryan has been a little more quiet than normal because we're having a very operational discussion, Ford and I, back and forth. But something that Bryan has really brought to my attention more than once, right, is with the training piece, is it's difficult for me at times to schedule training because I say, Bryan, I don't have time to shut down to do training. To which Bryan will then respond that I really don't have time to not do training. Like if I don't make time, then we're just going to be stuck in a rut. And maybe that's something that I'd really like to hear, you speak a little bit about, is how you feel that it's important, not only valuable, but important that we make time and we devote time, and the time be that somehow that training or that benefit for the team be paramount, be more important than the actual work that I need to get done in that moment.
Yeah, for sure. For me, one of the things that we've talked about a lot in the last 6 months is shortage of the right people, how hard it is to find the right people. And I think that the reality of solving that problem probably does not come from finding out more people outside of our organization. I think the reality of that is finding ways to promote and bring up the folks that we have in our organization. We've got some great folks, and we've got some young folks, and we've got some folks with a lot of experience and some folks with less experience. And I think that experience is a big piece of it, but the only way you can accelerate that experience curve is education. And the more comfortable we can get our folks with the skills that they need to be ready for the next position, the better they will be as a resource for their current team, their next team, for our organization as a whole. That's one of the things that came out of our foreman meeting, really. So a foreman meeting we talked about a couple weeks ago. It's difficult for someone who with a lack of experience or maybe a lack of education in regards to the specific skills that they might be faced with, to acknowledge that at times, right? Like there aren't a lot of people who are real eager to tell you what they don't know about how to do their job. So I think that one of the ways we combat that or compensate for that, mitigate that, is to be intentional about recurring training, putting our folks in position to enhance their skills and knowledge, so that we can put them in spots where they can use those skills and knowledge. We can't ever be upset at ourselves for not having someone who's ready to take the next step if we never gave them the opportunity to understand the skills to take the next step.
To sort of piggyback on that, is another one of the places that I think we see similarities with that is safety. So a lot of times, you've probably heard it on this podcast where Bryan and I, we've talked about safety, and I say that we are safe. And I don't have the metrics. I don't have the paperwork, the formality to prove that I'm safe. I can prove that I'm safe because I'm safe. I can't prove that Berg is safe because we were intentionally safe. And so it's a very fine line, and it's almost like a difference without a matter. It doesn't matter. Difference without differentiation. It doesn't really matter until something goes wrong, and then I can't prove that was an anomaly, and now I have a problem. Which certainly, knock on wood, we always hope doesn't happen. But I think the training and safety is very similar in a lot of ways with that. That we have Blair on board now, who's going to really try and formalize that safety, try and make it a thing. And so, you may hear a little bit more that we're going to require. We'll do a little more delving into when there's a minor incident. We just had a very minor incident recently, but it's something we'll address. And there will certainly be a repercussion. And you see it right there. Ironically, there will probably be. If it was you and I, it would probably be, because you would tell me to do it and I would say, okay. And then I would maybe get to it. And then you'd have to talk to me again. Now we have a person in place and sort of, bringing it all together in place, whose responsibility it is to make sure we do this thing, that as long as it's done right, no one's ever going to notice. And we're all going to reap the benefits of it from an insurance standpoint, from the jobs we can bid standpoint, and from a everybody always goes home safe standpoint. But if they do their job right, and Blair does that, then we're going to be in the best position we can to always be in that position without ever feeling like anyone did anything.
Yeah, I mean, the two really do go hand in hand, right? Training, helps our folks be better prepared for the situations that they are going to come across, which will, I think, likely make them safer at their job because they have an understanding of what they're doing and what to expect. And the safer we are, the less we have to hopefully worry about folks who might be put in scenarios where they don't understand how to react or respond. So I think the two do go hand in hand. And I think you're right. I think we've got a safe group of people who know what they're doing, and which is awesome. And we can rely on some of that experience that we talk about. Some guys who've been here for a while or been in the industry for a while. We probably have to get better at the documentation, the formalization of that. And that is, I think, on my Berg resolution list for sure. But hopefully we can do it in a way that isn't painful. And it just gives us an opportunity to prove that our folks know what they're doing.
Yeah. And I want to take a second before we move on, and we can shift, into another one of the resolutions, and just say this podcast is meant for our team, and certainly anybody can listen to, but meant for our team. But the people who are out in the field every day working with this equipment, you lose sight of how big it is, of how powerful it is, of how dangerous it is. I mean, if you just I oftentimes like analogies, and I like visual things. Like if I just took even a 51 or a 63, a 138, not any of our big machines, and I just put those three machines, and I said, all right, Ford, we're going to build a cool playground in the middle of Morgantown. We're going to put the machines there and leave them running. It would be chaos. I mean, a lot of people would get hurt. Stuff would get destroyed. It'd look like a tornado went through the middle of town because people don't know how to run this equipment. They don't know how to be near it. They don't know how to be safe. That's part of the experience with our team, is that they all know how to do that. So you take a site that's not much bigger than a playground at times, and then you put 5 or 6 huge pieces of equipment, and then, okay, now let's throw in some more subs, and then multiple people doing different things, and then a few people walking around checking safety, and somebody better check survey, and all of a sudden you have a full playground with a lot of heavy equipment running, and everything goes fine almost every day, because that's how good they are at their job. That's how safe they're being. That's how aware they are of a machine. Whether it be when I see our guys working under phone or electric lines, or digging on top of a pipe, or doing any number of things, and you see how skilled they are at this. I don't want to jump out of topic, but you lose sight of that because you're so used to seeing it. You know what I mean? You're just so used to pulling onto site and seeing, a 490 with a 6 and a big truck. That's just the size of that. Where you pull onto a smaller site and you got a 138 and a skid loader and a triaxle, and then that's just the size of that. But if you actually step back and look at them compared to the car you drive on a normal day, or you got to go, plant a tree in your backyard and you're using a shovel. You know what I mean? It is a wildly different scale, and it really speaks to our team of what they're capable of. But I think it speaks to us that we need to work on training and safety to make them as good as they can possibly be. Give them every opportunity, because the further they go, the further we can go. And it sort of translates to another one of Ford's points, which is putting them in a position to be successful. That not just winning a job, because any of the estimators can go out and win any job that Ford wants. If Ford says, I want that job, we go win that job. And there's big companies that do that all the time. They go in at 0 or negative. And then they say, okay, guys, figure out a way to make some money. That's not how I want to certainly operate. I don't think it's how Ford and Bryan want to operate. But the best thing you can do right out of the gate is put our people in a position where they can succeed. Have a good bid that's complete. You have as much information as you can. You feed that to the team. We talked about pre-construction. Get that to the project manager and the superintendent. Get that to the foreman. Get it right to the laborer. Everybody knows what they're doing, and put them in the best possible position based on giving them the best project in a good area with the training they need. That's a safe environment, and really give them the best chance to turn around and make Berg successful.
Yeah, I think I just want to wrap this up with the safety piece, and it kind of ties to the crew continuity too, because I got to go out and pull some levers the last couple of days, and one of the guys gave me a hand signal for something he was doing on the job site, but I hadn't worked with him before, and so it took me a minute to realize what he was indicating. And then I think back to growing up and working with my family, and like we worked together for years, and so a nod, you knew what that meant, or certain symbols, you had your own nonverbal communication style. And that's part of those two things kind of tying together, is that safety of understanding what somebody else is saying, even if they're not yelling because equipment's loud, but a lot of it is hand signals and stuff like that. So having the continuity of the team allows them to know what each other is saying without having to stop what they're doing. And so we think that creating that crew continuity will also provide an even more safe environment for everybody.
Yeah, great point. You know, one of the things that I was thinking about as you guys were talking here is, especially for newer people, and I can, your confidence goes up a lot faster than your skill level does a lot of times, right? So that's the one thing that I think where safety and training also help bridge the gap. I got a 16-year-old who's learning how to drive. He's getting very confident, doesn't necessarily have all the right skills yet. So, but that just made me think about that. I had to chuckle.
Well, and also just wanted to touch base. You said about education, and I think that like education, we get into that whole topic, and it's not education. Education can take many forms. It can be formalized. It can be non-formal. It can be book-based. It can be on the job training. So education is a huge word that, some people might be like, oh no, we're going to be sitting in a classroom or something like that. And there might be some of that, because there is certain things that's the best way to learn, but there's also a lot of education that just goes on day to day. I see a lot of pictures coming back from different job sites, and two guys are just standing there talking or pointing at something on a job site. And that right there is education as well. So it takes many forms, and anywhere you can get it, if you're new or new to us or new to the industry, like just soak it up as much as you can.
Yep, for sure. Yep. That's a great place to wrap it up. Got some resolutions, some things we'd like to look at this coming year. And hopefully you're all making your resolution list too at home. Thanks, folks. Have a great day.